Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. This is Media Health Forum, live and direct here at Quezon City, Philippines. I am Edwin Eusebio with Lakay Rolly Gonzalo, our co-host for this special episode of Media Health Forum that will tackle about some health issues. And today is a special day. Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat at special ang ating araw ngayon sapagkat halo ang ating mga guests, particularly our special guest straight all the way from Australia. And you are free to ask questions via online sa pamamagitan po ng ating online broadcast and later on today for the mainstream. We will again tackle the issue about the medical cannabis. And without further ado, here are our guests that will introduce by Lakay Rolly Gonzalo. Do you have the list of our guests, Lakay, na ipapakilala natin for today? Okay, nandito sa atin si Kevin. Hindi ko pa natatanggap yung ating guest list. But anyway, para ako Kevin, para at least ma-introduce natin ang ating mga guests. Our guest today is none other than the president of Cannahopefuls Inc., formerly Philippine Cannabis Compassion Society, fighting for her daughter, na si Julia. She has spearheaded the advocacy for medical cannabis for 10 years. She's a dentist by profession and a resource speaker from the 17th Congress up to the present. Our kaibigan, our friend, si Dr. Donnabel Cunanan. Doc, welcome back.
Thank you for having us. Good morning, everyone.
Again, we have Doctor is a practicing anesthesiologist and a former president of Philippine Society of Anesthesia. He is also a board member of the Philippine Society of Cannabinoid Medicine at Masikhay Research. And Honorable Dr. Gomez. Doc, welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
And last but not the least, an 8 times national award-winning marketing, communications, and management executive. Ivan Alexander is the co-director of Australia's largest medicinal cannabis and industrial hemp expo, Hemp, Health, and Innovations. Ivan, welcome to the forum.
Thanks for having me. Those words sound big when you read them out, don't they? I didn't mean that. Morning.
All right. So, medyo maraming bilingual tayo ngayon. And sa ating mga kasama. For the opening statement, unahin na natin, of course, si Doc.
I'm a practicing anesthesiologist, and one of our areas of expertise is the management of pain. Pain can be both acute or chronic. Acute pain is something that happens in the operating room after surgery. You manage the patient's operative pain. Sometimes this pain can become chronic. In other words, it lasts longer than the expected recovery from, let's say, surgery. There are other conditions that are not related to surgery but cause a lot of pain. And these are the painful conditions that medical cannabis has been shown to be very helpful for.
Si Dr. Annabel. Ma'am Cunanan, Dr. Cunanan.
I represent Cannahopefuls Incorporated, a patient organization in the Philippines who is in the forefront of the medical cannabis movement. So I represent my daughter. Her name is Julia, who's been suffering from an intractable form of epilepsy known as Dravet syndrome. Together with me are my fellow board members and Cannahopefuls advocates, Mami Cecil and Mami Birdie, na meron din pong mga anak na meron pong intractable seizures. So we firmly believe in our organization that cannabis should be not just the last resort of treatment to our patients, but rather be the first line of defense to our patients who have been suffering from different kind of illnesses. Kagaya po no, ng sinabi ni Dr. Angel Gomez, it is also good not just for seizure disorder, but also for pain management. So we are here to advocate since 2013. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Evan Alexander. I run Australia's largest medicinal cannabis and industrial hemp expo. I put together a few pages of, I guess, basically the state of play and where Australia's at the moment, and I guess a little bit around our journey to have gotten where we are now. I'm not sure, at some point, I guess I'll just go over and cover some of the key points. And I guess, obviously, the idea being that running over Australia's circumstances and situation may be feeding into where the Philippines is and where to from here for the Philippines.
Okay, thank you, Lakay. Baka mayroon ka ng sisimulang tatanong. Go ahead.
Yeah. Ivan, welcome. Welcome. Yeah. How long have you been using medical cannabis?
About 20 years.
Oh, 20 years.
I'm older than you, maybe.
That's why, ang kanyang tanong sa akin eh, how long have you been involved sa akin? Ha? Sabi ko, very new. So, it's surprising to know that you've been using medical cannabis for the past 20 years. Huh?
Yes, yeah, but you know, within the legal constraints, of course. How about probably the best idea if I maybe just go over some of the key points around where we are in Australia and maybe give you an idea of what that looks like over there. I think one of the main things, you know, over the last 10 to 20 years, since the stigmatization around cannabis has changed internationally, Australia has certainly been a part of that. I mean, as stands at the moment, cannabis is still illegal in Australia technically, but in 2016, it was made a prescription-only medicine. Yeah? It's one thing to say that cannabis is legal, but it's another thing for all of the various stakeholders. That means the public, doctors, and everybody to come on board with industry and universities and put a system in place. And essentially, we found over the first year or two, almost nothing happened. There was about 1,000 prescriptions written. Now, 6 years later, we've had about 330,000 prescriptions for medicinal cannabis. Half of those, though, have been in the last 18 months. So for 4.5 years, it took a long time to put an industry together. And then over the last year and a half, it's really snowballed. It's also worth mentioning that it's a special access component within the prescriptions legality that allows for individuals to access actual cannabis, flower, oils. There's only a couple of products that are available from a pharmaceutical perspective. I guess one of the other big things is in 2017, Australia legalised hemp food. So that's not medicinal cannabis per se, but hemp seeds are legal consumption for humans. So that's created a huge market in the health sector across Australia as well. Right now in Australia, there's a party called the Australian Greens Party, and they've got a bill that is about to go in front of the Australian Senate in about 2 months. And essentially what they are saying is the industry is currently worth, in Australia, legally, $66 million a year. That's expected to increase at about 30% a year for between now and 2030. So what the Green Party with their Senate bill are saying is that we're looking at about $28 billion, and they're looking to move from a prescription model to a more over-the-counter model. Currently, you can buy CBD oil over the counter in pharmacies, but it must be less than 2%. It's hard. Richard asked me to put one page together, and I put 4 together. It's really hard to get everything, an entire country of 25 million people into a small situation. But yeah.
What is still to be done in Australia?
Yeah, so I guess where we are now is, obviously, so essentially in the first year, you had 144 physicians giving out 1,000 prescriptions. Now, 6 years later, as I said, it's 330,000, but it's 4,500 doctors doing it, not 144, and it's about 100,000 patients. The price is about the same as the black market. The issue is that you've still realistically probably only got about 10 to 20% of the country who uses cannabis accessing it legally. So where Australia has to move at this juncture and with this bill is looking how we regulate so that, our children are protected, that people driving under the influence of cannabis is a big issue in Australia. When I spoke about, some of the hiccups within the system, you can legally consume cannabis, but there's drug driving tests all over Australia. And if you can stay in your system for 30 days. If you consume cannabis, you might be affected for 24 hours. But if 3 weeks later you get pulled over on the side of the road, you will be charged with a criminal offence for having cannabis in your system. So we're still sorting out things like that as we go. And that's what I guess I meant by it's about all of the stakeholders, particularly 3 levels of government. So local, state and federal, because laws change, coming together to work out where we go from here. And ultimately, they're looking to put a national regulatory body in place that's partial government, partial private, and that controls what goes on and how the regulations are put in place.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Iban. Thank you, Lakay. And again, let's ask naman itong si Dr. Patungkol dito sa ginagawa from the Masikhay Research. How's the research going on, sir? Paano ba natin ngayon isinusulong pa rin itong ating advocacy na ito sa mga authorities? Somehow, medyo, as we all know, we still have the negative impressions out there.
As far as research concerned, we find it not worthwhile duplicating studies that have already been validated. Because one of the arguments being leveled against us is that we have to study it, we have to do our own research, we have to basically repeat what has already been done. I find this a pointless exercise, and we are trying to propose studies, very well-conducted research done abroad, Australia for example, and we cannot understand why research done abroad is somehow unacceptable for our purpose. Okay? Because if we take the pharmaceutical industry as an example, the medicines we take are really something that were developed abroad. Okay, we have local generics, but these are basically duplications of the molecule that has been researched and developed abroad. So why now do we have to duplicate, let's say, research done on paracetamol to be able to sell paracetamol here? That's not done. Okay? So I think the same argument can be made for cannabis. Given the fact that it's still controversial in some places, that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here.
So, as we all know, we have ample supply of cannabis. At isa sa mga isinusulong ni Dr. Richard Gomez, the General Manager of Power Tech Corporation, our producer, ay mapansin itong ample supply ng cannabis natin kaysa nasasayang lamang ano ho. Anyway, si Dr. Cunanan, Doc, kamusta na yung sinusuplayan ng cannabis? Una yung anak na ano na ang latest sa kanyang kalalagayan ngayon so far?
Ayan, thank you, sir. Let me just make it clear that as of this moment, cannabis is still illegal in our country. Pwede lang po natin itong ma-access through an FDA-approved provision, which is known as a Compassionate Special Permit, which, like what I've said in my previous interviews, the Compassionate Special Permit is very incompassionate, considering that the amount or the cost of the imported cannabis product that we can avail would cost us around 32,000 US dollars for 1 year medication. So roughly around 1.7 million pesos. So that's very expensive, and I don't think yung mga mahirap nating mga mamamayan, lalo na even the average na earner would be able to afford such medication. So I would like just to agree with what Dr. Gomez have said, that for the longest time that we have been really working with the government legislators, lagi pong sinasabi ng ating pong mga Philippine Medical Association, some of them would say in the leadership na kailangan natin ulitin, right, Doc Angel, yung ating pong research. So, kami, as on behalf of patients' perspective, we don't think that it is really necessary, that's very irrelevant to redo the research that has been already been done abroad. Kasi even we have to make it clear na kahit po yung gamot na iniinom ng mga anak namin ngayon na nirereseta po ng aming mga doktor, these are pharmaceutical grade products that are imported. Diba? Right, Dr. Angel Gomez? And we did not even see any doctor would question yung pong kalidad, yung potency ng gamot na nirereseta nila. So we would like to challenge the leadership of the Philippine Medical Association on behalf of patients organizations such as Cannahopefuls Incorporated, na sana po kung ano na yung available na R&D nila, research and development, meron po tayong local facility, which is the Bapertech Corporation, which is very much willing and very much able to do such medications na ma-produce po yung ating medical cannabis extract na mga gamot. Yun lang po.
Right. Doc, anong pwedeng matutunan ninyo kay Ivan para mapabilis yung mga panukalan sa Kongreso o sa Senado?
Yan, sir. Congratulations in Australia. So, kanina, I've been listening to him, and he said that even though it's legal, at some point for in Australia, they still have a lot of struggles, right? You still have a lot of difficulties. But can you help us on how we could be able to move forward and enlighten all our Filipino audience here, especially our legislators? Is it true that when you legalize cannabis, like what other legislators would say, there will be a zombie government or zombie? You know what zombie in the Philippines? So everybody...
I'm across zombies, yes.
Yes. So is it applicable, and is it true in Australia?
Absolutely not. Of course not. I mean, look, my mother's New Yorker, born and bred American. My father's Australian. I've spent most of my life traveling the world. What you've seen over the last few years internationally, I mean, obviously Thailand is one situation. You know, countries like Spain and the Netherlands and the US have been doing this for a long time. Uruguay. You've also got countries now, obviously Canada with recreational, and Israel. It's happening all over the world. Yeah. Australia is in a situation where what happens with a lot of countries is every situation is different. And I guess that's the point I was trying to make before. So you need to work out what works for the Philippines, what specific set of circumstances work best for you guys within your legislation and communities. By all means, Yes, I mean, what's happened in Australia is due to public pressure, the laws were put in place. The laws were put in place from a medical perspective. In America, you don't go to a doctor to get cannabis. In Australia, you do. You go to a dispensary in the States and in many places recreational. It's completely different platforms. And again, I guess that's what I mean by, the facts and the research around cannabis in general are, as you said, internationally have already been put in place. I do think that due to the stigmatization around the plant, we're still 30, 40 years, 50 years behind where we probably should be as far as research goes. You spoke before about your daughter epilepsy. So childhood epilepsy has been where most of the studies have been in Australia. Also multiple sclerosis, palliative care, chemotherapy, for looking at nausea and stuff like that. But particularly the main study research centre in Australia is called the Lambert Initiative, and that's with the University of Sydney. Professor Ian McGregor runs it. It was funded by a gentleman whose grandson had childhood epilepsy. And I met these people because they came to our very first expo 7 years ago. And his granddaughter's seizures went from, she was on the brink of death, hundreds and hundreds a day to maybe 3 or 4 controllable seizures every few days. He then funded the University of Sydney and the Lambert Initiative, and they put this study into studying cannabis in Australia. You've got to a point now, as I mentioned, where our capital city has completely and utterly decriminalised cannabis. So that's where all our politicians are. Whether that's chance or I won't go into it. But so in Canberra, you can grow 2 plants at home for yourself. For every adult, you can grow 2 plants. You can carry 50 grams of dried cannabis and 150 grams of wet cannabis on your person. It's completely fine. You're allowed to smoke or consume as much as you like within your own home. It's up to you as an adult to make that discerning idea. And now that again is a step up on the medical situation. So again, I know that's a long answer, but I guess the question again for me, and I say this all around the world, is what works for your country, and then what's the best way to navigate that towards a meaningful outcome.
Thank you so much. So hearing from him, he said that in every country, there would be different regulatory frameworks. Exactly, because
they're all based upon the same principles.
Exactly. So hearing from him, we can say that there's nothing to really fear about cannabis. In fact, based on research, cannabis is in fact way, right, Doc Angel, less toxic as compared to legally prescribed medication. So, ayun po, no? So, kami po sa Cannahopefuls Incorporated, like what, we have to put public pressure. So, that's why we have to continuously advocate on behalf of the patients until the time that the government has no reason for us not to have it available for the public consumption for legitimate patients only and for medical use.
All right, do you have something to say?
Yeah, just one quick point. So what was really interesting when we started the Expo 7 years ago, the first thing we noticed was lots and lots of young parents. So it's not people pushing prams, a lot of elderly people, a lot of disabled people, a lot of people looking for alternatives to morphine-based medication. And what was interesting is we did one expo in a town called Launceston, which is in a state called Tasmania. It's an elderly town with an older demographic. We had 1 in every 1,000 people. It's a city of, I think, 100,000 people come to the expo. 70% of them were 65 or over. What these people were looking for is relief. They've heard in the news about cannabis. They're starting to be able to break down the stigmatization and the demonization that's occurred. And they're just desperate for something to help. We had to, yeah.
All right. Thank you, sir. Well, I would like to address these next questions to Dr. Angel Gomez. What are the possible applications po nung ginagawa nating research, possible uses of cannabis in the field, in your field, particularly in anesthesiology?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, pain management is like one of most immediate, I guess, applications of medical cannabis, because we have patients with chronic pain that rely on over-the-counter medicines that, when taken in excess, can really damage your kidney. Sometimes it also hurts your liver. So we have patients who are looking for better pain relievers. And we know that cannabis is a naturally occurring substance. We actually even make our own form of cannabis in our bodies because our bodies have receptors for these chemicals. Now, whether the body can make enough of it or it needs a little supplementation is really the focus of one of the research directions now. Why do some people feel more pain than others? Is it because they're not producing enough of their own natural painkillers? Or is it because they just need a little more to help them along? So we're trying to look for the safest, the most effective type of solution to different conditions that cause pain, especially chronic pain.
Thank you, sir. See, Doc Richards, I think you can answer some questions sapagkat, as from the very beginning, Doc Richard is advocating this cannabis, and he's always saying that cannabis have a potential drug that can be used to fight those symptoms that we're talking about. Doc, yung paghiwalay ng mga ingredients ng cannabis na lagi mo sinasabi, capable ba ang Bauertech corporations regarding?
Yes, Bauertech is very much capable of isolating the various compounds within the cannabis or marijuana. Kaya natin i-isolate and mix them again in proper proportions para sa specific na medicine for specific conditions. For example, let me just share this. I'm also a practicing naturopath. And I see about 100 patients every day. One of the patients, actually hindi patient, father of the patient, went to me last week. Yung anak niya may epilepsy rin, has been suffering, and nagsiseizure about 4 times a day. Gumamit na rin ng iba't ibang mga medications, wala nangyayari. Until a few years ago, he heard about cannabis. Ayaw man niya, pero nagtanim siya. Nakatira siya sa medyo hilly part outside of Metro Manila. Nagtanim siya, itinitrim niya araw-araw, tinago niya sa ilang mga tanim niya. Kasi meron siya taniman, hilly. Bumaba ang seizure ng kanyang anak 3 times a day, twice a day, once a day. And for so long, hindi na nagsiseizure yung kanyang anak. Wala nang ginagamit na anti-epileptic drug kung hindi ito lamang na cannabis. Actually, crude method pa nga ang ginagawa niya. Kumukuha siya ng dahon, inilalaga niya, araw-araw pinapainom sa anak niya. Alam niya, it is illegal. Pero para sa isang ama, gagawin niyang lahat para lang maibsan yung kalagayan ng paghihirap ng kanyang anak. For so many years, hindi na nagsiseizure. Nagpunta siya sa akin, akala niya meron na tayong medical cannabis. I said, no, not yet. Wala pa sa ngayon. And siya, kinukontinue niya yung kanyang ginagawa. Now, let me just relate that. That is a very crude method of using cannabis for medical purposes. Kinuha ang dahon, inilaga. Hindi siya very efficient. Ang kaya ng BioTech is to identify the compounds within, to isolate, and to give yung tamang compound para dun sa condition ng pasyente. Maraming iba't ibang condition, iba't iba rin ang combination na ibibigay natin.
Yun, thank you. Kaya we're doing this particular forum about cannabis. We keep on calling on our legislator na mag-legislate na, madaliin na, kung saka-saka, kung kakayanin naman, bigyan ng prioritization itong legalization ng medical cannabis. Lakay, baka may karagdagan ka pang tanong?
Ivan, I'd like to ask, what's your personal experience on using cannabis?
Well, these days, to be honest, I don't use a lot of cannabis myself. I'm not in a situation medically where I need to. My job is more to advocate for individuals. Have I ever? You can't put me on the spot with that sort of stuff, mate. As I said, you know, and I get asked this question a lot. You know, I do. Did a radio interview in Australia a few days ago, and I mean, you know, one of the questions that sort of keeps coming up. I think it's also worth mentioning too. You know, we talk about medicating with cannabis, and you asked about zombies before. You know, I mean, a lot of individuals who are taking prescribed medicinal cannabis, wouldn't know. You know, the dosages and the way in which it's organised. And you know, ingested is specifically put in place. My mother has multiple sclerosis. My mother uses medicinal cannabis. Yeah, she's got advanced multiple sclerosis. She takes CBD oil. And again, you know, you're not going to. There's no change when you talk to her. It makes absolutely no difference in the way in which she responds in a conversation. And I think there's a misunderstanding that amongst the public in general that is, you know, what you were saying before, that there's this, that it creates that stigma around it. Look, as I've often said, I think that for us, my job is to bring everybody together to have the conversations. That's why we started the Expo in Australia. That's why you know, extremely thankful for Richard and Jem for having me here today to be able to talk about these sorts of things. My role has always been to bring people together, to bring doctors, to bring industry, to bring growers, to bring manufacturers, producers, laboratories, tertiary institutions together to talk about how we manage this and break down some of those myths around it.
All right, thank you. Sa ating mga kasama sa media, baka pwede na kayo magtanong. The table is now open for your inquiries and questions. Sarmil Melendez, do you have any questions in mind?
Good morning again. I think the problem in the Philippine situation about the decriminalization of cannabis or marijuana is the unanimous or at least majority decision of Congress and the Senate. My question is, being one of those proponent to decriminalize cannabis, have you tried writing each of the 250 plus congressmen and 24 senators so that you will be able to relate to them directly the advocacy that you are undertaking? Thank you po.
Thank you for that question. Yes, our answer would be yes. We have tried to write our legislators both in the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate. So we have been really communicating with them, not just in writing, but also we try to also seek an audience with them. We go to their offices one by one. We lobby in their offices, both in the Congress and also in the Senate. So it has been going on for the past almost 10 years. So we are hoping that finally, imagine we have been doing this for the past 10 years, and finally, we are hoping and very positive that we can make it happen under the administration of President BBM.
Do you have still any questions out there sa ating mga media friends? Joy, Benedict Abaygar, do you have any questions there? So far? None so far. So, Mil.
I have a question to our friend here from Australia. Have you experienced the same obstacle that we are encountering now
Absolutely.
when you try to legalize cannabis in your place?
Absolutely. There's a gentleman in Australia called Andrew Cavasilis, who's he's an amazing individual. He was a public defender who threw in his life and moved over to northern New South Wales and actually had legal licenses to grow cannabis and hemp, which is low THC cannabis, right back in the 90s. You know, people like this have been doing these sorts of stuff that Richard is instigating now, and you know, the societies like Gem, you know, is heading up for 20, 30 years. Really, the last 10 to 20 years is when there's been traction. A good example of that is, and that progress has been, for example, I'm 46 years old. When I was 20, if I got caught with cannabis, I would be charged, I would be taken to court, and could be, you know, jail, fine, whatever it was. Over the last 20 years, as public opinion has shifted, that is no longer the case. Cannabis is technically illegal, but in every state and territory in Australia, there is a leniency allowed for police, which they generally, now I'm obviously not going to speak on behalf of the Australian Police Force, but there is a leniency allowed for police whereby cautions, so most states it's up to 1, 2, 3 cautions, and particularly for minors, for kids under 16. And then once you hit that level of cautions, it's often they're called cannabis education courses that people are you know, asked to attend. I say forced to attend. They are. They're compulsory to attend when they reach a certain level. Yeah. Or similarly, counselling sessions, which is not so much saying you've got a problem. It's saying what's going on. Go and talk to somebody around it. Let's make this a medical issue as opposed to a criminal issue. Yeah. So that shift has occurred over the last 10 to 20 years in Australia. And as a result of that, you know, we've sort of reached where we are now. But as I said, you know, it's been 6 years now since the medicinal laws came in, and all of half of the prescriptions written have been done so in the last 12 to 18 months. So it's taken us a period of maturation to reach where we are now as well. But absolutely, this is a problem that is faced by everybody, you know, that is dealing with these laws. And as per Richard putting these things, you know, these health forums and these sorts of conversations in place, the most important thing in the first instance is having the conversations, having genuine, calm, considered conversations around cannabis. And the last thing I'll say is that leniency to cannabis does not occur for other drugs. In the ACT it does, but that's full of politicians. So, but it has not applied to other products. It's only cannabis that this has happened for, and there's good reason for that, and that's based upon the research that's coming through.
Thank you, sir. Now we are receiving some questions from online, and would like to ask it on you. Anyway, a question for Dr. Angel Gomez. Sir, what are application or possible uses of cannabis in the field of anesthesiology? Possible use of cannabis in the field of anesthesiology.
In anesthesiology itself, I I think mentioned earlier, anything that can minimize or reduce the patient's experience of pain is ultimately very useful. Now, we're receiving reports of people who may have cannabis in their system prior to surgery, and some of them might need more of the conventional forms of pain reliever just to get them through surgery. But after surgery, their experience of pain is milder than those who rely exclusively on conventional pharmaceutical products. So before surgery, they might have some cannabis in their system that may require a little higher dosage of our anesthetics. We see the same thing in alcoholics. Okay, people are chronic alcoholics. You try to put them to sleep with an intravenous anesthetic, and you notice that they'll need a little more. That's because their system is already primed to handle this type of drug or substance. So the same holds true for cannabis, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because after the surgery, their experience of pain is also modified by the presence of these substances in their body.
Doc Angel, because of your peculiar view of these issues, alam namin na medyo yung ibang asosasyon, particularly the Philippine Medical Association, currently does not support itong medical cannabis. Ano ang view mo dito? Paano mo kina-counter yung ilang mga, sabi nga, statement nila against your advocacy?
Okay, like I said, we already have high-quality evidence from studies done abroad. Now, I don't see why those studies don't apply to us, because like when there is a new antihypertensive drug or a drug for lowering your blood sugar, the moment it comes out, it's immediately taken up by our local physicians. Why? Because I guess the impact of these big pharmas are very powerful, no? So you want, well, okay, there's of course money involved. Yes, we understand that. But why are they so reluctant to recognize these types of clinical evidence, which is obviously accepted elsewhere? Are Filipinos so unique that what applies to or maybe an American won't apply? So again, we feel it's a very artificial reluctance to recognize evidence that's already established abroad. If they want us to duplicate these types of studies, we can, but it's like saying, okay, we already invented the wheel. It runs, our vehicles. In order for me to build a Filipino car, I'll have to reinvent the wheel again. Why? It's already there. I can just buy it off the shelf, right? Now, if that shelf happens to be in the Philippines or elsewhere, then that's maybe the issue now. Do we have to import everything that we use, or can we begin to make our own product?
Okay, we Benedict Baygar.
Yes, good morning po sa ating mga doktor. Gaya ng binabanggit ni Ka Edwin, kamakailan lamang ay nagpahayag ng pagkontra ang Philippine Medical Association. Ano pong hamon ninyo kay Dr. Donnabel at Sir Dr. Angel? Ano pong hamon ninyo sa PMA? Membro rin po kayo ng PMA ba?
Okay, again, the PMA is basically a medical society. They can be for or against any issue. But they really don't have the last say in the decision-making process of whether medical cannabis can or cannot be legislated. So it's more of a legislative issue. A few days ago, our former president already, through her, reiterated her support. She's supporting the bill that is being refiled in Congress, which we actually supported many years ago. So this is the second round, no? So we understand it has to go through a political mechanism for adoption. But she says, when I'm abroad, she has this chronic pain in her neck. She gets a patch, she puts it on, it helps her. But when she comes here, she cannot get it. And that's the reason she's trying to also support the, let's not call it even legalization, the adoption of medical cannabis in our pharmacopoeia. Okay? Whether it's decriminalization, legalization, those are technical terms that we have to work through. But like in Australia, okay, it's still a crime. Even in America, it's still a crime, but you have areas where you're allowed to possess and use a small amount. The model we were trying to follow was Thailand, because we were on the same track when they were pushing for their decriminalization. But where they succeeded, we failed because this passes through Congress without a problem. The first time it was filed in Congress, I think there were only 6 opposition. More than 100 congressmen said that's fine. But it hit a roadblock in the Senate. Okay? And it's funny because prior to that, the former president was very supportive of it, but at the last minute he seemed to change his mind. So we don't really understand the reasons for it, but this is more of a political exercise now. Okay? And let's say even if it passes the bill and it becomes decriminalized, the Philippine Medical Association can oppose it all they want. But the end result are the users. You have to talk to a patient now, like Donna's kid, di ba? Who's free of seizures. Or a patient who's now free of pain. And you're gonna tell them they cannot take this medicine. Or this medical cannabis, whatever you wanna call it. The proof is really in the pudding. You can cite so many studies to say that you shouldn't have it. You try to tell the patient now, the relief you're feeling is not real. Okay? So that's where we're coming from.
Thank you, Dr. Angel. So, with regards to your question, sir, on behalf of our organization, the Cannahopefuls Incorporated, we first and foremost respect the position of the Philippine Medical Association. However, like what Dr. Angel said, that they are not the last say. They are not the ones that is going to really decide if this medical cannabis should be available to the patients, especially to our patients in our organization. And I would like to believe that their position does not reflect the position of all the members of the Philippine Medical Association. So, kami naman po sa punto de vista ng mga pasyente, palagi po naming sinasabi sa Philippine Medical Association ay kami po ay merong karapatan bilang pasyente na mamili ng gamot na sa aming kaalaman ay makakatulong sa aming mga pasyente. We have tried several anti-epileptic drugs, and as of today, as I speak to you today, none of these traditional medications has already decreased or even controlled the seizures of my daughter. So that is the main reason why Cannahopefuls Incorporated was born to be the voice of the patients, to tell them, the Philippine Medical Association, that, hey, there are legitimate patients who are in need of these alternative medications. So we challenge them. We challenge them on behalf of the patients to debunk all these scientific research to debunk all these proven clinical trials that has been made abroad, which are very effective for different illnesses, such as we have Epidiolex for intractable seizures, which are commercially available abroad, pero sobrang mahal naman po if you're going to import it abroad for, I think, 55,000 pesos for just a bottle of medication. So we challenge them to continue to open their minds and their hearts to finally, once and for all, umupo po tayo sa gitna, let's compromise, and once and for all, think the welfare of the patients. So yun po yung challenge namin sa Philippine Medical Association.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Donnabel. Doc Richard, I've been talking dun sa ilang mga legislators natin somehow. As you know, I have a radio kasama ko si Senator JB, si Congressman Jonathan De La Cruz, at iba pa. Pag napag-uusapan namin yan off-air, kukumustahin kanila, ano ang feedback mo kung if ever napatawag ka, maipaliwanag? Meron ba tayong, sabi nga, in layman's term, maipapaliwanag natin kung bakit natin dapat suportahan na yung legalizations ng cannabis?
Maraming haka-haka, kuro-kuro ang hindi totoo o hindi tama tungkol sa medical cannabis. Maraming kulang na impormasyon. Dapat i-share natin ito. We have the responsibility to share it. Let me just cite an example here. In 2014, the Department of Health approved 10 halamang gamot. Ito ay galing pa rin kay dating Senator, Dr. Juan Flavier. Iisa-isahin ko lang 10 lang itong nilista nila. Acapulco, Ampalaya, Bawang, Bayabas, Lagundi, Nyog-Nyogan, Sambong, Tianggubat, Ulasimang Bato, Yerba Buena. Actually, mahigit 100 ang halamang gamot natin sa Pilipinas. 10 ang in-approve ng DOH noong 2014. I have a pharmaceutical company. Gumagawa ako ng drugs, gumagawa ako ng supplements, gumagawa ako ng gamot mula rin sa halamang gamot. Mas marami akong ginagamit lampas sa 10 na nakalista dyan. Gumagamit ako ng makahiya, gumagamit ako ng malunggay, gumagamit ako ng iba't iba pang halamang gamot na hindi nakalista dyan. In fact, ako po ay bahagi ng technical working group para sa Philippine Pharmacopoeia itong 2020 na mahigit 40 ang aming inilista na. Higit dyan. Anong pagkakaiba ng marijuana? Ayun ay isang halamang gamot din na nakakatulong panlaban sa maraming karamdaman. Ako'y nakapunta na sa bundok, ako'y nakapunta na sa lugar na kung saan yan ay traditional na ginagamit. Kausap ko yung mga tao na gumagamit yan, yung mga tribal leaders nila, yung mga ama ng mga pasyenteng may sakit, ginagamit nila yan. Bakit ayaw ipagamit sa atin? Sa listahan natin, sa UN, sa WHO, na-downgrade na nga marijuana. Ang sa atin sa Pilipinas, sinahabol natin, bakit i-decriminalize na yan para gamitin na rin natin halamang gamot. Kasama na 100 halamang gamot na ginagawa kong gamot sa ating pharmaceutical company.
Ikaw ba't naniniwala na pag na-legalize yan, dadami addict?
Iba pong usapan yun eh. Dahil sa ngayon, milyong-milyong ang addict sa Pilipinas. Maraming addict sa bawal na gamot. Maraming addict sa sigarilyo. Maraming addict sa alak. Maraming addict sa kape. Maraming addict sa soft drinks. Meron ding addict sa marijuana. Pero pinag-aralan na sa iba't ibang bansa ang level of addiction. Mas mataas ang level of addiction ng alak, sigarilyo at ng sweets kumpara sa level of addiction sa cannabis. Ito ay may gamot at wala pang namamatay sa Pilipinas dahil sa cannabis. Doctors, ilang tao nang namatay sa Pilipinas dahil sa sugar? Pagmamahal sa sugar. Grabe. Isa sa bawat 5 Pilipino may diabetes. Kada isa dyan maaring mabulag, maputulan ng paa o maaring madialysis. Ilan ang tao namatay dahil sa diabetes? Walang bisyo yung mga yan. Hindi yan nagda-drugs. Kundi mahilig lang sa matamis or sa kanin. Ang Pilipino may only rice, carbohydrates converted to sugar. Nakakamatay. Ang cannabis, ilan ang namatay so far? Sa inyo po pagkakaalam, how many people in Australia have died from cannabis? 0. In the Philippines, 0. How many people have died from sugar in the Philippines. Katabi ko si Dr. Mucha. How many people have died from diabetes?
Thousands per year from diabetic complications.
It is because of addiction to sugar or rice. Only rice. Dapat ipagbawal natin ang sugar at ang rice. Hindi ang cannabis. Hindi pala nakakamatay ang cannabis.
Thank you, doctors. Lakay, baka may karagdagan kang tanong.
Ivan, presently, what is the state of cannabis in Australia? Is it over the counter? Oil? Capsule? Paste?
Medicine in general, the way in which it's, yeah. So basically, it's an interesting one, but the nuts and bolts of it is that the TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, which is like the Foods and Drug Administration in America, controls prescription medicines. There's only 2 prescription medicines you're allowed to access, but through the special access scheme, you're allowed to access cannabis flower, which is what traditionally we'd call bud. You can also, there's oils, there's capsules, there's tinctures, there's vaporizers, there's ointments, creams, you name it. There's pretty much options available. The price is slightly higher than the black market, which is a bit of a concern. And that is, frankly, because there's handling along the way through the medicinal companies. That said, the payoff there is the product you are receiving, is safe. It's up to the safety and health standards of Australia, and you can be guaranteed that what you're getting is a quality product that you can be assured to take without any complications. What do you mean, sorry, sir? Requirements? You mean for a patient purchasing? A license? Absolutely. So you need to, essentially what happens is through the special access scheme. So let's say that I want some medicinal cannabis. I go to my doctor, my GP, my doctor on the corner. I tell him my situation. The doctor makes an assessment based upon what my problems are. He then, and this is what I meant about making the system more efficient. Now, within 2 days, you can have your product delivered to your front door. Yeah?
Is there any side effect or negative effect of pre-market of cannabis in Australia so far? How's the how they control it so far?
How do they control how it works?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, obviously, it's a good question. I mean, like most people dealing with legislated cannabis in the world, there is protocol around it. So, for example, even cultivation, production, and manufacture. So that's not done through the Therapeutic Goods Administration. That's done through the Office of Drug Control. So there's hundreds of licenses to Australian companies. Yeah. And the idea there, which I was going to touch on here before, I mean, essentially what you should be trying to look towards, any nation should, is a domestic industry for obvious reasons. Yeah. So Australia has got between 1 and 200. You can see them listed on the government's website, and they are given licenses for cultivation, production, and manufacture. And all of those go through health and safety standards. So first of all, you need to apply for a license, and that's quite a lengthy process. And then, of course, your product is tested all the way along. At the other end of the spectrum, like I said, the doctor a GP needs to be able to put a recommendation or a request through for a patient to be able to purchase cannabis. And once again, once that arrives with you, you just need to have, essentially, you need to be a card-carrying medicinal cannabis user, and that's your safety net, so to speak, from a legal perspective.
All right, thank you. Ang bilis ng oras, and Sir Richard, pwede na tayong siguro parting message or so far. So, we have the parting message for our guest. Sa terms ng ating doktor na anesthesiologist, Doc, last parting message natin or appeal if you have any.
Okay, we know that cannabis works, and for pain management, it's a very effective and safe alternative to pharmaceutical products. So this is all the reason I need to advocate the legalization of medical cannabis in the Philippines.
Dr. Donnabel, ma'am.
Gamot ang marijuana at dahil gamot ito, ibigay ito sa mga nararapat na lehitimong pasyente. At patuloy po kami na mag-a-advocate hanggang dumating ang araw na talagang ito ay magamit ng aming mga pasyente.
One thing that you'll notice across the world where these sorts of laws and legislation is put in place, particularly in Australia, is that it is the patients or the families of the patients that are doing most of the advocacy. And that's because they've seen the results. They want their family members to have the best condition of life that they can, and they're willing to work around whatever they need to work around to ensure that that happens.
All right, thank you. And that's it. Our health room presentation for today, Monday, and we hope to see you again, not next week, but the week after. Because may lakad po ang ating bossing. Nasaan ang punta mo, si Richard? Mukhang meron kang medical missions na sasagawa.
I was invited to join an ASEAN conference in Thailand, where it will be attended by all the top universities in ASEAN region, together with government officials. We happen to be the only private group invited there.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, our friends in media, those who are watching right now through social medium, via Facebook, and later on today through mainstream media, we have to thank you all. Maraming salamat. Until week after. Bye.
Yeah, I'd also, just really quickly, I'd also like to say thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you to Richard for the invitation, for Jem and everybody here for having me today, and keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much, and thank you to all you guys for attending, because at the end of the day, that's the other part of the equation, and without it doesn't work. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. May document lang natin yung appeal ni Dr. Donnabel, ma'am.
I would like just to invite everyone to kindly like and share our Facebook page. It's Cannahopefuls Incorporated. So, kung meron po kayong mga pasyente, kamag-anak, na meron pong karamdaman na nais po na gumamit ng cannabis or marijuana, kayo po ay welcome sumali sa aming organization. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, ma'am. Lakay, close mo na, Lakay. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Closing na. Until next Friday. Monday. Yeah. Next Monday.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
They're all the same. They're all based in 2014. So
you can't really see it so much. Go up, speed bigger.
it's Facebook and YouTube. And also.
Enjoy.
So if the society, national society, is to form a basically, so and then we come and certain miracles get I think we're about to start. There you go. What's that?